I never said, why me? And I know that that's not normal, and I feel like that was a gift from God.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 94 of the Strokecast. I'm releasing this episode right after the Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S., and one of the many things I am thankful for these days is the community of stroke survivors that I've become part of. It's all been quite a bonding experience. In this episode, I talk with Julia Fox Garrison, stroke survivor and author of Don't Leave Me This Way or When I Get Back on My Feet, You'll Be Sorry. Julia brings a great sense of humor and a positive energy to both her book and to this chat. Her story isn't all laughter and giggles, though. I mean, Julia does share her frustrations and disappointments, too. And even though her stroke was in the 90s, her story is just as relatable today for folks who are going through their first strokes now. So now, let's meet Julia. So, Julia, thank you so much for joining us on Strokecast this week.
Thank you for having me.
So, we've heard a little bit about you already, but what was your life like before the stroke? What were you doing?
So I was a software support manager, and it was a high pressure job where if systems were down, we were troubleshooting customers' systems.
So I was going to say, as a software support manager, that means that, I've made my career in marketing and in technology. So basically your job is correcting all the things that I said before the sale.
Yeah, so we would be dealing with customers that have bugs in their software, or they could be completely down. There'd be a lot of frustration and anger. So I had a live support group that took calls 24/7, and then there would be for longer term problems, a second tier of support people. But I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. I'm still very close to a lot of them. And the day of my stroke, we were actually moving my whole department and company to another building. And I also was responsible for the phone system and programming it and making sure, how a call gets routed into the building. And I had a cold that day. And I was going to be staying at a local hotel near the new building to just manage everything. And I said, I need to, deal with this. And I had my lunch, and then I had this pulsating in my head, and it just grew and grew like a volcano eruption. Evidently, every time my blood pressure was pulsing, it was releasing blood in my brain. And this went on for hours. I believe I actually had our secretary drive me to the hospital. And let me tell the audience, everyone who's had a stroke probably knows this, that you always call an ambulance if there's something severely wrong. Don't tough it out, because they don't take you right away. And that's what happened to me. I was actually put on a gurney in the hallway because my blood pressure was so low, it wasn't alarming, because I was releasing blood in my brain instead of anywhere. It was the last thing I remember before I stroked was this big burly nurse running me down the hallway. And he said, grab my fingers. And this is exactly the time I had my stroke, and I couldn't move, and I guess everything went paralyzed on my left side. The last words I said, am I having a stroke? Now, what's weird? I don't know anyone who had a stroke. I was 37 years old, and I just had no clue about stroke or anything. That was an old people thing. And I said that, and this nurse said to me, what, you want to smoke? Huh. And I even at that point, I knew he was doing that to keep me calm and not say, you're going to croak. He was saying as a kind of a joke to divert the question. Mm-hmm. So that was the last before I passed out. And then I had emergency surgery, brain surgery. And my whole family came. I'm from a family of 8 brothers and no sisters. And everybody was there in the waiting room during this whole period. And they pretty much said they were only doing life-saving measures, and there was no repairing at the time, and they weren't sure I was going to make it. And I actually did die on the operating table. Everything stopped. My heart stopped beating. My brain stopped functioning. I stopped breathing. And I had this vision of a ladder. Most people get a white light. I'm like, I get a ladder and I have to climb it. Don't I get to float? I mean, where's my wings?
I mean, even in Tom and Jerry, Tom got an escalator.
I know. There you go. So I had a ladder, and the ladder with me on it represented a choice to either stay on that rung or come back, albeit in a different broken body. And I often joke, I say, "Can I come back as Beyonce?" And clearly, I'm glad I came back. I mean, I'm now 20. I'm on my 23rd year, July 17, 1997.
Wow. So it sounds like you made the right choice on that ladder.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think everybody has purpose, and mine certainly changed. But I do say a prayer every day, and may I impact someone in a positive way, and may they in turn impact someone else. And I hope that I'm doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did your life change? When you say it made you change, yeah.
Well, you can't go through anything, and I know some of our fellow survivors will agree that you can't go through anything without change. I mean, we change every day anyway, based on our experiences. But losing half your body and losing a lot of your abilities that you took for granted and your independence, I think that was my biggest robbery, because I was such an independent person, and to have to rely on others to help for almost everything. Initially, it was everything. I mean, I couldn't even wipe myself in the bathroom, and I needed a party in there because I needed so much help. So, my life changed just drastically. My son had turned 3 5 days prior to my stroke. And 5 days later, I don't see him. It was just such a long recovery, and I think everybody is never done recovering. Though I think we're always trying to improve. It's just with stroke, it's so overwhelming. There's so much to improve. Like, you want to work on the leg, you want to work on the arm, you want the fingers to move, you want your toes to move. So you have to kind of pick and choose so you don't go crazy. And then eventually, I think over time, you have to say, I need quality of life. Now, how can I have quality of life without always having the major focus of rehabilitation? So my life changed. So I'm not answering the question. Okay. The question is, how my life changed? I'm not a support manager. I desperately wanted to go back to work. I tried. It just wasn't in the cards. A lot of it, I can drive locally, but I could never get on an hour commute onto a major highway with left neglect. So I'm now an author, and I speak nationally about, I speak a lot to healthcare professionals, and I speak to survivors and educators and students about just the power within. And that there's no parameters around the human spirit. And I hope I'm a role model for that. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Is I write a lot of things. I write. My old physiatrist is down at Emory in Atlanta. He just asked me to write an article for a rehabilitation magazine. So I hope to do that. Those are the kind of things I do now. I'm writing my second book, although it's taking some time. That one's going to be about growing up with 8 brothers and also being a nonconformist.
That's awesome. There's a lot of key things in there to unpack. First thing I want to mention is that for new listeners who haven't heard me talk about Dr. Kimberly Middleton and others, a physiatrist is a rehab doctor. I know when I write about physiatrists online, everybody thinks I've just misspelled psychologist. Or a psychiatrist, also an important member of your care team, but a physiatrist, if you don't have a physiatrist in your stroke recovery, get one, because they are an awesome partner, and for most folks, they are probably a more practical partner than a neurologist is.
Excellent point.
also, you mentioned how we change every day, and that is so important. I think one of the things a stroke causes is introduces to many of us for the first time is the concept of neuroplasticity. Your brain is always modifying itself and adapting itself to try and route around damage. It's how we're able to recover, because the neuroplasticity. But neuroplasticity doesn't start when you have a stroke. It's always ongoing. Your brain is always changing and modifying as you build new habits, put other things on autopilot, and change your perspectives from new data, new input, new experiences.
This is so true. Now, if you looked at my MRI, I've had a lot of health issues since my stroke. Not related to my stroke. I just happen to be the lucky one that gets these weirdo things like ocular myasthenia gravis disease, which I don't have, but they put in my records because I had double vision for 14 months. And that brought me more to my knees than my stroke because I couldn't even walk my dog. But one of the things they during my MRI, I have a new neurologist, and he looked at my MRI and he said, I've never seen the amount of brain damage ever in a patient that's so widespread, but not only widespread, but deep. And I was I'm like, wow, this has been over 20 years, and no one ever said that to me. Mm-hmm. But he was just amazed because I'm functional, I'm talking, and he's saying the amount of damage is on my right side of my brain is over 60%, and it's like I should be a vegetable. But this is where I think I'm living proof about neuroplasty. I was doing it in 1997 before it was really a buzzword or very much a hot topic. I actually got invited out to Utah by a neuroscientist because he said you were doing it way before it was big. What I did in my recovery is I desperately wanted to walk again, and I was in a wheelchair, and I used to have my mom bring me to the mall and just park me there for 2 hours, and I just watched people watching the mechanics of walking, trying to run that over and over in my head. And that's kind of the same thing what you're just saying about the neuroplasty and building new pathways. So I think that, our brains are pretty fabulous machines.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's really interesting too is when you start looking at your background in working in customer support, a lot of that role, I'm sure, involved a background in trying to dissect systems and figure out what's going right, what's going wrong, what do we need to change, how can we fix this, how can we get the customer back up and going. And essentially, that's kind of what you're doing when you start observing folks. You're just trying to figure out, how does this system work, what's working right, why is mine different, what do I need to do, how do I fix this bug?
Wow, I love how you put it and framed it like that. Actually, what's weird, Bill? I have no technical abilities whatsoever now. That ability went away. So other things came into my life that were different to organize writing a book. And you know what I'm saying? It's just like, wow, my life filled in a different way. And the irony of something I used to do that I can no longer do. But I love how you framed it, that's what I used to do. Yeah, I had to read. So I have a picture of my son when I do presentations, a picture of my son. And he's 3 years old, and it's his birthday party 5 days prior, right? And it shows a construction-themed party. We're wearing hard hats. There's a construction cake. And I use it to say the irony of this is that I had to reconstruct my life. I had to learn how to walk upstairs, rebuild everything in my life. And this 3-year-old child that I have up on the screen, he had more abilities than I did. And that little boy knew that. It was such a simple memory. I used that memory, that birthday party, over and over again in the hospital when I was alone and sad that how do I get back to that simple 3-year-old birthday party? How do I do something that most people aren't going to remember or think is a big deal? I wanted those simple things again. How do I put my arm around my child or my husband? The simplicity is what the stroke gave me, is to be grateful for not those big things of the house, the home, the family, which are all wonderful, but to have the independence to go to the bathroom by myself or to roll over in bed. I don't know.
It really forces a back to basics approach.
Yes.
When we start thinking, okay, now I'm back to where I was when I was 6 months old. How do I learned how to do all this before. I can learn how to do it again.
Yes, good point.
So what was your rehab experience like?
Just the focus wasn't patient-centered or person-centered care like it is. Those words came out around 2006.
Right, back in 97, back then, weren't they still? It was still accepted that you had 12 months to recover, and that was it.
Oh yeah, that was it. And I received a lot of negativity because my brain was very precariously in poor shape. Every vessel in my brain was blistered. Here's the deal. I never said, why me? And I know that that's not normal. And I feel like that was a gift from God because everyone in that hospital was in some kind of predicament that could have said, why me? And I just instinctively knew that. What I said was, how? How do I get back to being my husband's wife and my son's mother and to my job? How do I get out of this hospital bed? That made me very driven. And so when I was faced with a lot of negativity because they were saying I was in denial. I wasn't really capturing what I had wrong with me. Well, I knew enough to ask the right questions, but they used the word denial. I was non-compliant. Which means, non-compliant means you're belligerent. Well, no, I was just really invested in myself and my rehabilitation. So the language that was used during my recovery was not very good. And so I talk a lot about communication in my presentations because that's the key and the foundation of any relationship. So, but I had really good, I was lucky in that I had a great neurologist. I had some good nurses. I had my PTs, OTs that were great. It's just the general culture was different back then. I felt I started realizing that I had a lot to say and that I wanted to show others that I didn't write my book for cathartic reasons. I actually wrote it because I wanted two things: to show the healthcare professionals that there's a human being in every patient, and we're all unique. We're not the same. We're not a cookie cutter nation of patients. We're all unique and respond differently. And secondly, anyone told that you're going to die or your recovery is only this high, that you have the power within. Excavate it and dig for it because it's your quality of life, and only you can achieve what your goal is in your head. So don't let others set the goals for you. You set your own, because sometimes they might make that bar too low for you. So there was a lot of statistics and percentages and labels put on me. The percentages were really grim for my recovery. I was told if I lived, I would never get out of a wheelchair. I was like, I'm going to defy all those odds because, the statistics are great for baseball, but they're not good for human lives. And so I was just really feisty. But again, I grew up with 8 brothers and no sisters. And I think that also gave me a background for not being a shrinking violet. I had one doctor say to me, what is your goal? And I said, I want to get back to the gym. And she said, well, none of my stroke patients go to the gym. And I'm like, well, here's one that's got a plan that wants to do it. I want to run again. That's still my orthotist who makes my bracing. He has the same vision for me. So he's still with me. Awesome. He just says, start on the grass first. Because I do fall a lot. I do trip but
and the ground is a lot further away than it was when we were 3.
Yeah. I always say, falling is my method of moving forward.
Oh, that's great. It's progress is progress.
Right.
So, I mean, as I read through the book, there's a couple of things that are really, lots of things that are really interesting about it, but it's different from a lot of the memoirs I've read in a few ways. For one, the chapters are all extremely short. They're 1 to 4 pages, which as I've learned more and more about folks with other stroke-related challenges than I have, I imagine that probably makes it a lot more readable for survivors who may have cognitive or visual processing or language processing challenges to actually read through. Was that a conscious decision to do that, or is that just sort of an awesome side benefit of having the short chapters?
It was absolutely. Well, also, because I stroked, I am very single task now. I used to be such a multitasker. And with my stroke, it's made me more single task. And also I have ADHD a little bit, where I have a hard time remaining focused. So I knew that my audience would probably have the same issues. So I wanted it to be short so we didn't have to go back. I also use names like Dr. Jerk, Nurse Doom, Dr. Bleak, Dr. Panic, Nurse Go Lucky, so that people didn't have to remember a lot of names.
Right.
Because just my family alone, I just used my brothers, not their wives or anything, because just learning all my brothers' names was enough for anybody, I think. Mm-hmm. So there was that. I also wrote, and this is why it caused such a stir in the New York publishing arena. I went to a publisher's auction because it's written in a unique format that most memoirs are not. I had a strong intent of making, I didn't want to write a blow-by-blow recovery story, like journalizing, and this is what happened this day, this is what happened. I wanted it to be a very interactive read. And so the first few chapters are written in third person. And you see Julia kiss her husband and her 3-year-old son, and she gets in her car, and she has a corporate commute for an hour to a corporate job. And I want you to watch her do her life by routine, because I think that's what we fall into generally in life. We do routines. And so I just wanted you to see what mine was like before my stroke, the day of. And then once the hemorrhage occurs, I end the chapter where she's gone and start up with you. So now you're on the gurney with me, and you're riding the gurney and feeling all the frustration and the confusion I felt. I really wanted to portray how it feels to go through the things I was going through. And then at the very end, there are 2 chapters that are in first person. And the reason for that is I don't feel it was my place to preach to the reader. I don't want the reader to think I'm telling them what they should have learned. So I felt I had to personalize just how I felt. These are some of the things I've learned. Of course, that, the book's been out for 12 years, and I've learned many things, which now I put in presentations because they're very much life lessons and things that apply universally to everybody's lives.
In some senses, with the short chapters and with the second person perspective, a lot of it reads in some respects like a blog rather than a book. Again, makes it just that much more accessible for a lot of folks, which is great. The other thing that I think is really interesting too is that despite the fact that we are 20-some years on from the experience, despite the all the years that have passed since the book was published, it hasn't become obsolete. While the medical technology has changed drastically in that time, the core of the story is still the same. I think any stroke survivor today can relate to it the same way that you, as you're explaining your experience 20 years ago.
Oh, I agree. It is a timeless recovery story. And it's just I call it my perspective inside the bed rails. I'm very blessed that the book has taken on a life of its own. I mean, I'm doing a lot of events where they buy cases of the book and give out to all the attendees, or it's in a lot of colleges and universities as a teaching tool, which I feel so grateful for, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of medical books that teach the patient's perspective and how they feel. And I'm so happy to know that, although I learned there's one class in Oregon at Oregon Tech or something, and it's patient management. Huh. I was like, oh, so they wanted, how would you manage this patient? Huh. But it doesn't matter if they're teaching the perspective of the patient and the whole person. It's not the condition, it's the mind, the spirit, and the soul of that person, not just that condition. You have to teach the whole body.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that's really interesting too. You talk about the idea of patient management. Yeah, I get it. But at the same time, because once we're in that hospital, it's sort of that great equalizer as patients, in the experiences you're going through. But at the same time, 2 days ago, you may have been, managing hundreds of people. You may have been managing millions of dollars in business. You may have been running a household. You may have been, doing whatever. And now, if you don't, if the staff does not understand that, it's very easy to feel, condescended to or disrespected as, I know stuff. I'm not just this person you just had to help use the bedside commode.
It's so true. And not only is, strokes, the debilitating components of stroke, but also being in the hospital, in a Johnny, you're vulnerable, you're anonymous. You're like every other person in that bed. That's the way that you're looked at. And because they're treating you, they're caring for you. You can't care for yourself. Well, you know what? The essence of me still exists, and my dignity still exists. So I had several circumstances where my dignity could have been stripped from me, and most people would say it was. But in my mind, I felt like, no. Okay, I look different. I don't look who I was. I mean, because my face looked, I had paralysis on my left side, so my left side just stayed frozen, like, the eye was like frozen like a dead fish on a dock, where the right side was, expressive and squinting and showing me, and plus I was on so much prednisone. And
yeah, I think one of the things that helps to think about it too is, it's not, you're not a project for the doctor. The doctor, the OTs, the PTs, the speech therapists, the nurses, the CNAs, they are all part of your care team, the team that you are assembling for your recovery, and each has a role to play in that. And they all need to be team players on that team.
I love the way you put that. Yes. It's not silos of different pieces of the healthcare system. It's everybody's role is to help that person get better.
Exactly.
And that's the paramount goal. And how to go about it it's got to be, everyone has to be involved and on the same page.
Exactly. And you or your caregiver have to be the captain of that team.
Yes. That we joined a club that none of us asked to join. Now we're members. It does change you, and I think it also gives you kind of a certain new vision of your life, not just the being paralyzed, but like what is important to you now. It becomes so different.
And what I like to say is the stroke club is filled with cool kids, but the dues really suck.
Oh, I love it. Yes, the dues. And we are always paying dues.
Exactly. And you tell a lot of great stories in this book, too. A lot of great anecdotes about that. But can you tell us a little bit about your Wile E. Coyote moment during your hospital room manicure?
Oh, my God. I don't know, Bill, I don't know why, but I became obsessed about having my nails done. And I don't know why, because I really wasn't like that so much before. But
it's like one thing you can control.
That's exactly what it was. My mother kept saying, why do you want your nails done? I go, because I can pick what color nail polish, and I have control over that color. But I don't have control over my hand. I don't even know where my hand is. So I want to paint it as bright as possible so I can see it, find it, know where it is. And that I still have that problem. I still have proprioception problems. I don't know where my body is in space, and I'm constantly touching the left side. But so anyway, back then no one came in and did, manicures or hair or anything like that. My husband, being as great as he is, found someone, paid an extraordinary amount for a manicure, have someone come in my room, and she didn't really speak English, so it was really, she didn't understand what was going on with my body, and that poor thing, because everyone with stroke knows that you have tone and spasticity, and my hand started, every time she started to paint it, she was trying to keep it flat, like iron it with her hand, and it would start curling up and then going up to my shoulder, like she couldn't control the arm. By the end of it, she ran out of there without her bag, without her coat. She was totally had red nail polish all over a yellow T-shirt. I'll never forget. It looked like she was in a fight. It was just crazy. And the funniest thing is, one day, one of my brothers decided to surprise me and bring me to the salon because I was going crazy being impatient. And he mapped out all the handicap wheelchair access to this nail salon. Well, it was the same nail salon the woman was from, and she saw me with all my brothers like bodyguards. They were going to fire me, carry me in, and she said, "Oh my God!" She was screaming. I could tell she was just so panicked. So, I mean, that's the thing. You could sit down and cry, or you could go, "Oh my God, this is the funniest thing." You couldn't write this.
Right, but you did.
You cry, you laugh. You can cry. It's important to cry. It's important to acknowledge. Please have the pity party, but know to have an exit strategy. You can't stay at the party, or you won't make progress.
Right. Yeah, there comes a point in every party that you go to where you realize, this party is not going to get any better than it is right now. So now is probably the time to leave because it's only going to get worse from here. I first encountered your story through Debra Myerson's book, Identity Theft, and she introduced us after she was on the show a few weeks ago. So how did you and Debra connect?
So it's just a small world. She's in California and I'm in the Boston area. But one of our I did a book club locally way back when. And one of the people that attended it said, this was before Debra had her stroke after me, but when she had it, she was going to Boston for, she had aphasia and was working on getting her speech improved. And she was in a study here in Boston. And so we ended up having lunch a few times. We got together through that. And then over time, when she was here, a few times here and there, and then she decided that she was writing a book, which really made sense because her books, it really is a good resource for the emotional side and the academic side, because she's a professor. I mean, she's has written other books, So I thought her book really fills a void, I think, and is a really good resource. And she asked if I could be one of her interviewees, and I'm trying to throughout the book about my experiences. So that's how we became friends. And like I said, I feel like you. I feel I'll be friends with any person that comes across my path. I feel so blessed that my world keeps growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and her book was so interesting in that it is just so much of the sharing other stories in order to help frame her own. So it's a very different approach. And that's one of the things that I think is so interesting when we look at the variety of stories that we hear from you and read about in your book, in Deb's book, in Jan's book. I talked to her a couple of weeks ago, Jan Douglas, out of Chicago area as well. Ted Baxter, who was on the show last year, we were talking about before the call. Christine Lee, who was on the show earlier in the year. Everybody brings something very different to their story. And of course, still very different from the one everybody knows about, which is Dr. Taylor's book, My Stroke of Insight, another big one. So I think there's just this tremendous variety of stories that need to be told from survivors and that can help other survivors who read it and can get some value out of that. So, I mean, what advice do you have for other survivors who are thinking about writing their own book?
Well, I think everybody, whether you've had a stroke or not, has a story in you, and it's unique and it's powerful because it's your life. And so I think if there's other people that are inclined to write a book about their experience, it's going to be unique, and it's important for people to see other stories and how they overcame, because everybody's path recovery is different. And, we're all climbing a mountain, but we all have a different path on that mountain to get to the top. So I think it's important to document if you're inclined to, and to, when you do it, to be really authentic. I think that's one of the biggest advices I would say to anyone writing a book is that honesty is key. And, not to write superficially, but to really, because that's where the heart and the soul of your story is the authenticity of being you.
And that's fantastic. And I think that's helpful too, because when you write authentically, when you write from a point of true honesty, it's a lot easier to keep track of what you're writing about too.
True.
So I also love your core message of positive outlook equals positive outcome. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I, in my talks and my presentations, I always tell towards the end that everybody should come up with a mantra, whatever they're going through, because everybody faces some type of adversity in life. It doesn't have to be just physical. It can be emotional. It can be financial. There's all types. It knocks at our door. The intruder adversity knocks at all doors. And so I say to create a mantra to help you repeat to yourself something that will help you get through it. And mine from day one was positive outlook equals positive outcome. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that the negatives aren't there, they don't exist. They do. But if you focus on the positives, you're going to have a better outcome. So what I'm saying is, if you lost your arm, for instance, and you have a positive outlook, doesn't mean your arm is going to grow back, but you are going to have a better outcome if you have a positive outlook on what you're going through. Find the positives. Find what are the blessings in what the circumstance is. And they're there. Sometimes they have to be really dig deep for them. But I also say not just to have a mantra, but to also maybe have an empowering song. When you're at the gym and you want to really work out hard, you put on some kind of music that really motivates you. Well, that's the same thing too, is to find a song. Mine happened to be Christine Aguilera's Fighter, which is actually a song about a relationship breaking up. And mine is about my relationship with stroke. And if you read the chorus, it's really how I feel about my stroke. I don't have it in front of me, but it's about being grateful. Thank you for making me stronger. Thank you for making me a fighter. And that's what my stroke did for me, making me a fighter. And it made me stronger. It made me a little bit wiser. It made me a little bit smarter. I mean, it's just, you have to look at maybe you can pull that up. But that's really the essence of what my stroke did for me.
Fantastic. I think it's also really important what you said there too about, your arm won't grow back. I think the idea of what we often overlook is that, your positive outlook will result in positive outcome. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be your requested outcome.
Oh, beautifully said. This is true. Yes. We may have a vision that we have this, the long-term outcome is this, but that may not be the outcome. And maybe there's always detours. And the thing with detours are sometimes detours can bring a whole different perspective and view that you never had before.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Hugs logo you have on your website and your stickers?
Oh, yeah. So hugs, number one, anyone who meets me knows that I am a huge hugger. Like, don't come with extended hand, come with open arms, because I'm going to hug you. And I love
or in the case of many in our community, open arm.
Open arm, right. It's just like clapping one-handed on your leg. But so hugs. So that's one component to it. But the other piece is that I believe humor is what propelled me through getting through a lot of my difficult moments. So I coined hugs as humor ultimately gives strength, because I'm a hugger. And then I thought I needed to add, it's about, for me, and if you read my book, Don't Leave Me This Way, it's about humor. It's about finding the humor, even in the darkest moments. So that's how I coined hugs.
So Julia, this has been fantastic. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
I have a website. It's juliafoxgarrison.com. And just a thing on my presentations. I'm on these speakers bureaus, but it's all word of mouth. And so I'd be grateful to be recommended to other areas. I love presenting to new audiences in new regions and helping and transform perspectives and minds to a positive way. And I welcome anyone writing me. I'm Julia at juliafoxgarrison.com. If you have questions, I'm an open book. So you're welcome to write me. And I do enjoy talking with others. So there's my email, my website, and I do have a media bio kit if anyone's interested in that explains my messages, etc.
Awesome. And we will link to all that also over in the show notes over at strokecast.com/Julia. So Julia, thanks so much for being with us this week. This has been great. And I really enjoyed the book.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I love the way you have looked at some of the things I've said, that it's made me even think about some of the things that I think about differently. I look forward to being your friend now forever.
Absolutely. We're stuck with each other.
I know,
right? We can blame the brain damage.
It's a good thing.
Exactly. As we mentioned in this episode, I met Julia through Debra Myerson, author of Identity Theft. Debra joined us a few months back in episode 83, where she and her husband shared her story about the challenges that she felt after stroke. And that brings us to our hack of the week, one I personally have zero experience with.
So one hack that I have is I keep my bra hooked, so I can put the whole bra over my head one-handed.
So check out Julia's book, Don't Leave Me This Way, and connect with Julia. You can find all those links over at strokecast.com/Julia. Share this episode with someone in your stroke support network by giving them the link strokecast.com/Julia. Connect with me on Instagram by visiting strokecast.com/Instagram. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.